Allegiant Air took evasive action to narrowly avoid a mid-air collision with a private jet off the coast of Florida. But there's a lot more to this story, so we're going to take a look at how it's possible that something like this could even happen, and more importantly, you're going to see how close these two aircraft actually came to hitting each other. Alright, you have Allegiant Air Flight 485. It's an Airbus A320 aircraft. It's operating out of Fort Lauderdale, planning to go to Lexington before it ends up emergency diverting back to Fort Lauderdale because of what happened. It's at 23,000 feet, heading northbound with a ground speed of about 433 knots. Now, the other aircraft that's going to be a factor is Jet Edge 86. And initially, they're basically about on the same route, with Jet Edge being slightly behind them because they also took off out of Fort Lauderdale, but it's the executive airport, so a little bit different there. They're, however, going up to Hilton Head Island, and they're also at 23,000 feet, heading northbound, but they're doing about 460 knots. So what's happening here is Jet Edge is basically given a turn to the right because they're at the same altitude, and that's how the controllers are deconflicting them, is they're essentially wanting Jet Edge to turn off to the right so they don't overtake Allegiant Air Flight 485. Now, there's several different ways that air traffic control can deconflict aircraft. Altitude is obviously one of those things, but they can do things like this and give somebody a vector to fly. So right now, things seem to be going well as these two aircraft are appropriately deconflicted, but that's all going to change here in just a minute. Now, you're going to see in a second here that Allegiant Air Flight 485 is going to begin a turn to the right, and here's Jet Edge 86, and that's essentially what's going to put them on a collision course. However, as soon as they begin that turn, it's not really a huge cause for concern, and there's no alarms or warnings going off either in the cockpit or with air traffic control because of this lateral separation between the two aircraft. I'm not sure the reason why they make this turn, but according to a news report, air traffic control had cleared them to begin a turn to the east, so ultimately that's the reason why they end up turning off to the right. Now, air traffic control has some tools available that they can use to monitor potential collisions. And you'll have to forgive me because I'm not an air traffic controller, but when I looked this up, they have this thing called the Short-Term Conflict Alert. It's a computer-based safety program designed to help them prevent collisions, and it's predictive in nature. So it takes all this different data that's available out there, and the controller essentially is not aware of the system's operation unless there's a possible violation of separation. And when that happens, the system provides warnings to let the air traffic controller know about the dangerous situation and the conflicting aircraft. Now, the catch to all of this, as you see here, is the system is only intended to look ahead for around 2 minutes, because if they increase that duration, it'll just result in a bunch of annoying notifications. And 2 minutes is sufficient time for an air traffic controller to see a potential collision alert there and essentially deconflict those two aircraft. Now, the question is, what are the pilots seeing on their end, and how are they aware of this potential midair, and what actions are they taking? Now, there's something on board the aircraft called TCAS. It's the Traffic Collision Avoidance System that each of these aircraft are going to have operational at the time this happens. And it's a system designed to help give pilots awareness of other aircraft that are in close proximity to them and any potential collisions that could happen between other aircraft. Now, essentially, the way the TCAS system works is you have a transponder on each of these aircraft. It's constantly sending out signals and doing interrogations and getting replies, getting the data that it needs to make a calculation based off of your own aircraft position, altitude, airspeed, and track, as well as the surrounding aircraft and where they're going. So that way it can determine whether that aircraft is going to be a threat to you or not. And it's essentially building this bubble around the aircraft. So everything outside of this proximate is basically considered an other intruder. And so it's not going to be a factor that you need to pay attention to. Once it gets into this proximate ring, you still don't have a collision threat, but it defines that as an aircraft that is an intruder in the vicinity of you. It's closer than 6 miles laterally and plus or minus 1,200 feet vertically. Now, once it goes a little bit closer, you get into this area called TA, which stands for Traffic Advisory. This means you basically have about 40 seconds until you'll reach the closest point of approach between those two aircraft. And when you have that TA, what happens on the aircraft is when the system is armed and active, you're going to hear an alert, and it's going to sound like this. Traffic. Now, when you hear that alert, the pilot isn't required to maneuver the aircraft. What they're going to do instead is closely monitor the system to try to identify where that threat is. And on a clear visual day, you're going to try to look outside to see if you can visually acquire the aircraft that might be a threat to you. So as Allegiant Air is beginning this turn with the TCAS system armed and active, this Jet Edge 86 aircraft is quickly going to go from being an other intruder to a proximate to eventually a traffic advisory. However, as long as there's the possibility that these two aircraft could be a threat to each other, that TA will rapidly progress to an RA, which is a resolution advisory. Now, when you get that resolution advisory, it's going to sound like this.
Climb, climb.
And that means there's a real collision threat, and you have about 25 seconds or less until the closest point of approach between these two aircraft. Now, when that happens, the pilot is required to take the appropriate action to mitigate that collision. Now, depending on the type of aircraft that you're flying, with the autopilot system engaged, that autopilot might actually fly that resolution advisory for you, and you don't have to do anything other than to monitor it to ensure it's achieving the appropriate clearance and doing what it's supposed to do. However, this is an Airbus A320, and I'm pretty sure that that functionality is not built into it, so the pilots are going to have to hand fly this maneuver. So when they get that TA warning that progresses to an RA, they're going to go ahead and basically pull the aircraft up because it's going to direct them to climb to avoid this other aircraft, the G4, and simultaneously the G4 is going to get indications to descend their aircraft. Right around time 17:53:13, you can see Allegiant Air has begun that climb to avoid the conflict of the other aircraft. They're starting and they're up about 400 feet per minute. Jet Edge 86 is still at 23,000 feet, but they're going to begin their descent shortly. If we go forward just a few more seconds in the clock here, you can see that the vertical speed of Allegiant Air has rapidly changed to almost 2,000 feet per minute, and they're up at 23,600 feet. If we go and take a look at Jet Edge, it's not showing their vertical speed now, but they're now down at 22,450 feet. So you already have 1,000 feet at least of altitude separation between these two aircraft. We're going to go ahead and let this play out. You can see Jet Edge ends up being about negative 3,400 feet per minute, although it's still unclear as to why air traffic control either didn't get a warning, or they did get a warning and didn't do anything about it, or why air traffic control put these two aircraft potentially on a collision vector. And if you're wondering how close these two aircraft actually came to hitting each other, thanks to the data provided by Flight Radar 24, they found that looking at the ADS-B data, Allegiant Air crossed in front of the Gulf Stream, and the two aircraft were separated by 2.59 miles laterally and 1,175 feet vertically. So the TCAS system worked exactly the way it's supposed to, and we'll look for more details from the FAA investigation. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out another one on the channel, and I'll see you next time.